and welcome to the 100th episode of Some Magical Story Time. You know what the show is about now if you've seen any episode at all. But for those who don't, it's a show where I read what I've written, retell urban legends, and make up some exaggerations of stories from my own life. Okay. So, for this episode, we're continuing on with the third story in my Rainbow Magic series, the Confirmation Tour. It was just after 7 o'clock in the morning of Confirmation Day, the day when new pupils were given a tour of the grounds, chose their familiars, received their wands, magipads, broomsticks, reported to the guildmaster to be confirmed as members of the magical community, and received their timetables. Ruth was already in the common room, looking through the schedule for the day. Wanda and Nate were sitting with her, looking through it too. They were excited to get started. They were so excited to get started, they almost forgot about breakfast. So much so, they needed to be given a calming draft to calm them down. At 8 o'clock, they joined the rest of the school for breakfast in the Great Hall, where the headmaster, Professor Julius Raincloud, addressed the school with his usual welcome speech and warnings. As they were eating, they met and became acquainted with pupils in the years above them, the level orange and above, 2nd to 7th years, and were very pleased to meet them. After breakfast, pupils in years 2 to 7 headed off to class, while Ruth and her classmates were called up front and put into pairs by their tour guide, the school's deputy head teacher, Mrs. Athena McQuiggan, who had just shifted back into her human form after attending the assembly as a unicorn. She paired Ruth up with her classmate Peter Collins, a boy with sandy blonde hair and twinkling aquamarine eyes, who shook her hand warmly. She was pleased to meet him too. The tour began at 9:30 sharp, and off they went with Mrs. McQuiggan, who led them around the campus on their confirmation tour, which she explained was the most important tour a new pupil could take, as it was there to assign them with familiars and equipment, and then have them confirmed by the guildmaster himself. She then explained to them that the guild was their body of government and offices of education, and their confirmations were the ceremonies in which they would not only become members of the magical community, but also members of their guild as trainee witches and wizards. It was then that they stopped outside the familiar enclosure. "The time has come for you to be partnered up with your familiars," she told them. The master of the enclosure came to greet them. "Hello, first years. My name is Rudy Phineas Buckland, but you can call me Stag," he told them, quickly shifting into his stag form, and then back again. "I will bring you in one at a time to choose your familiar and show you how to summon it," he told them, choosing them one by one until they all had their familiars. Ruth had chosen a baby phoenix as her familiar. She had decided to name her Cindy and been given a special whistle with which to summon her. But she first needed to train her to answer to her summons. The next stop on their tour was to receive their magipads and smart wands. Ruth was called up to receive hers first, and was thrilled with them. Knowing they were tools to aid her education, She didn't dare use it for anything else. After everybody had received their wizard tablets and smart wands, it was time for them to visit the broomstick boutique to get their first broomsticks. The boutique was run by their flying instructor, Professor Kitten, who flew in to view using her cloak as wings and landed in front of them. "Welcome to the Broomstick Boutique," she said in a very friendly voice. "Before I call you forth to receive your broomsticks, you will first need your tokens," she told them, flashing her left hand at them, making their pockets glow. As they reached into their pockets and pulled out the flashing golden coins, they were amazed. Then, one by one, they were called forth to use their broom tokens to purchase their brooms. After that, she warned them not to try mounting and flying until they'd learned how, for health and safety reasons, mainly. Once they'd received their broomsticks, they were teleported to their own personal broom sheds. As the tour continued on to the burrows and cabins, which was home to a population of jovial little creatures with funny hats and pointy ears, who were exiting the burrows and entering the cabins. "This is the Elven Wood," said Mrs. McQuiggan, as she told them there were around 2,000 elves living in the wood, who lived in the cabins and worked in the workshop, which they entered through the openings inside their houses and exited, as they just saw, through the burrows. 2 little elves came to greet and welcome them to the school. The same thing happened with the leprechauns of the Shamrock Village, whose job it was to mine for gold, and their leader was Seamus, with whom Ruth was already on friendly terms. He also taught a magical history class on leprechaun magic up at the school. Their next stop was the Magic Forest, which was home to a herd of centaurs, who were very pleased to meet the newcomers, and each shook hands with them. A bit further in, they came to a turning which directed them through 2 clearings. On the left was the path to the Glitter Creek, and on the right was the path to the Starry Glade. They took the left path and arrived at the creek in moments. This creek was home to a family of mermaids, who were the most beautiful creatures they'd ever seen. Their top halves were those of beautiful young women, with sparkling eyes and wavy hair of all colours, and the tails of fish, where their legs should be. A certain mermaid morphed into a human and came to welcome them. She shook their hands and assured them no danger would befall them if they came here. "You are all very lovely," she said, lovingly, and before directing them to a shortcut to the glade and entering the water, morphing back into her true form. In the Starry Glade, all 10 million little fairies in the colony that lived there were very happy to meet them. The fairy talking to them had assumed her human form to do so. Her name was Astra, and she was the only one with the ability to shapeshift into a human. But it took up quite a bit of her magical energy to perform the feat. As she said goodbye to them, her energy began to deplete, turning her back to normal before she fluttered off to re-energize. As they entered the dwarf village, she warned them not to speak to any dwarf unless they were spoken to by one first, as the dwarfs considered it very rude for anyone who wasn't a dwarf to start a conversation. By luck, one young dwarf came to meet them, and he waited to be spoken to before introducing himself. His name is Wisp, and he's really young for a dwarf, as he was over 100 years old, and was learning their customs and culture. Wisp, said Mrs. McQuiggan, noticing the other dwarf staring at him. Upon hearing her speak first, their leader came and whacked her around the ankle. How dare you speak to Wisp first? It is a blatant sign of disrespect for our culture, he yelled at her. Ruth raised her hand, and he turned to her, inviting her to speak. Yes, young miss, he said. No disrespect was meant, sir, but Wisp was actually waiting for someone to speak first. She told him. His anger faded and was replaced with wonder at her words. Is this true, young Wisp? He asked the young dwarf. Yes, your majesty, replied Wisp, respectively. Oh, well, that's different. Our Wisp here is very young and hasn't yet been taught the customs of our culture. Please forgive my outburst, Mrs. McQuiggan, he said respectfully. He then looked up at Ruth. What is your name, young miss? He asked politely. My name is Ruth Jackson, your majesty, replied Ruth politely, bowing to him. He bowed back and said, I commend you for your daring today. Nobody has ever had the nerve to try reasoning with us before, he told her, using his magic to put a medal around her neck. Thank you, your majesty, replied Ruth graciously, as the tour moved on to the confirmation ceremony itself, which was taking place at the entrance to the gateway to the guild, where the guildmaster Benjamin Wandsworth was awaiting their arrival. He was a kindly old wizard who welcomed them all warmly and summoned each child to be confirmed one by one. When Ruth stood there in the center of the circle, he and his counselors joined hands to confirm her. As they did so, she emitted a whole range of different magical sparks, which they all read correctly. When they wrapped it up, he turned to her and said, Oh my, Miss Jackson, I haven't read that much magic in a new pupil since your great-great-grandfather was a young wizard in training. He told her in surprise. Thank you, sir, replied Ruth. As she left the circle, she gave a toot on her whistle, and Cindy appeared on her shoulder, now fully grown. She had answered the whistle without being trained, and was fully tame without needing to be tamed first. This was more of Ruth's magic working, and it amazed everyone in the clearing. Good girl, Cindy, she said lovingly, and Cindy pecked her lovingly on the cheek. Ruth laughed at this, and everyone moved out of her way as she began to smoke and erupted into flame. Staying aflame rather than combusting, the flames died down within seconds. Ruth, you're a pyromorph? Said Mrs. McQuiggan in shock and surprise. Yes, Mrs. McQuiggan, replied Ruth. replied Ruth. That's it for this episode, guys. I hope you all enjoyed. Until next time, Please like, comment, share and subscribe. Thanks for watching and have us a magical time.